So guys, when I'm just starting prototyping a new tool for my business or some separate pet project or something like that using n8n, my workflows usually look like this. You see, it's complete mess. Everything is unstructured here because it's much simpler when between your thing and your action is really little time in between. It's almost impossible to maintain this stuff and to make sure it's even gonna work, right? So my production stuff look like this. It's much more structured, easy to navigate in, and easy to understand what's going on. But most importantly, it allows me to achieve good numbers in failed executions. So I think today's video, I'm going to be talking about what do I use to make my workflows more reliable, and hopefully you'll find it helpful for you as well. So I'm going to divide all of this stuff into several principles. So first thing is workflow. Let me show you several examples how do I use sub workflows in order to decompose all the thing and to make sure everything has its own part of responsibility. So the first example will be with the sub workflows that you might want to reuse a lot, right? For example, you have voice recognition, right? Or you might have media recognition, like image recognition or something. Obviously, in your different projects, or even in different part of your single project, you might want to use it multiple times in different occasions, right? So my approach is that I simply have one separate workflow for that. As you may see, this sub workflow receives different parameters. So under the hood here, I have different types of recognition. One is for video, one is for voice, one is for images. So the key principle here, then once I receive all these parameters, as you can see, the example, user time, file type, voice, environment, chat ID, file ID, language. So after that, it simply does its job and then output the parameters that I need that I'm going to reuse later in any part of my workflow. So I can call this recognition subworkflow at any time. So when you see that you're going to use some functionality twice, you may simply spend a little bit much time, but organize it in this way. Once we're here, the second principle is backup yourself. As you may notice, I have different LLMs doing their job if needed. For example, for for image recognition, I have OpenAI, then I have Claude, and then I have Gemini. So I got my result in any case, almost in any case. If something is wrong in a big way, so then I will send an error message for the user or for myself, etc. Then, once we are here again, let's talk about sending messages. So I would assume that in your project, there are a lot of messaging. There could be internal messaging when you send message to yourself, or there could be a message to the user to let him know about something, right? So why not to organize these messages in one sub workflow and call this workflow every time that you need to message someone, right? So for this case, what you're gonna need? You're probably gonna need environment for it to understand where to output the data. Then some chat ID. Obviously, it can be different for every user. Then the message itself, right? And translate options. We will be talking about that later. And the language, right? And the type of the message. That's also important. So let me show you why. Let's go to this sub workflow to see how it's organized. Inside this workflow, you might notice several other principles that I am gonna talk about today. First of all, is to log everything. Log everything and every time. So every time that when I'm sending user the message, I log it in I create a lock in my Supabase without any questions, right? So that's a good thing to have, just one little note, but how much control then you will have to understand what went wrong in which occasion. So I figured out that for my project, I'm gonna need one, two, three, four, five, six different types of messages ever. Just six. It's not many. It's not hundreds. It's not even tens, right? So with simple switch node and different types of messages that can be called here, for example, I can say download file and then put a file ID here, and this exact subworkflow will output me a file from the Telegram, you see, because it simply receives this file ID from the parent workflow, and that's it. So instead of having different messages across your workflows, you simply can have one sub workflow that will do the job on every occasion. Send regular message, send message with a callback, edit the message, delete the message, download a file, etc., that you can imagine, right? That's another principle that for me is working like a charm. The next thing, once again, while we're here, I'm having new ideas. Let's talk about translations. So let's imagine I have onboarding of the user, right? So, and I want to support different languages in these messages. So I don't know how you guys handle that, but for me, what worked the best is to simply have a table in my Supabase. So this is a pretty simple table. In this table, I have a key and I have a default text, and also I have different columns for different languages. It's not that complicated, guys. So we need a key, and by this key, we will be retrieving the text of the user from the database. That's it. So how it works? Here we have a node that I called translations node. It receives a language as an input and a key as an input. That's what we need. Then let's go inside. Let's see some real execution like this. Yeah, so first of all, I normalize language here to get exactly two symbols here. And I have the default language like a backup. Then I simply get a row from my database with this key and different strings. And then I pick up the correct string based on user languages that I receive as an input. So if user is Italian, he will be getting either an Italian if it's present in my database or a default one. Every time before I got a system message, I can uh, call this node, and then I can simply send a message based on this node using my message flow. So guys, the next principle is not to rely on LLM if you can do it. So if something can be done with the code, I really try to stick to the code, because I had a bad time using LLM for things like aggregating or calculating the data for me. Let's see that this workflow, it already has different LLMs doing their jobs. At the end of the day, I'm getting the list of mails, right? And there are a lot of data in it. Let me show you. Just simple list of mails with different parameters. So instead of feed all this thing to LLM in order to calculate some kind of daily totals, so uh, it's much better to, yes, to have a code. So it's much more reliable because the code will calculate things. The code is much quicker, and it it will work the same every time you save tokens. And for me, it's a no-brainer. So if I can use code, I simply use it, because LLMs sometimes are really really bad at math. So obviously, if you need to aggregate or calculate or sum up something, please use code. So, guys, in my opinion, this is what makes the huge difference between production workflows and some MVP stuff. So, I would be glad if you find this video information interesting. So, see you next time.